You're listening to Mind Body Home with your host, Sarah Ann. I love meeting other women in business who are thinking outside the box. And my guest today, Alyssa, is a perfect example of that. After struggling for years with self-blame, stress, and shame around her disorganized home, she has come to realize that most home organization advice isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. After being late diagnosed neurodivergent, she began to think about organization a bit differently and discovered a better way to set herself up for success. And now she helps others with ADHD, autism, OCD, dyslexia, amongst many other examples of neurodivergence by providing them with proven resources, tools, and routines to take control of their homes and lives. Regardless if you have a formal diagnosis or have neurodivergent tendencies, Alyssa's advice speaks volumes to a broad audience, empowering you to replace the shame, stress, and struggle with organizing and clutter with peace, ease, and flow. I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Alyssa from Alyssa's Yellow House. Alyssa, welcome to the Mind Body Home podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. This is going to be a really great conversation. So welcome.
I love talking about this. So any opportunity that I have to talk about this, I am so excited.
Well, I love talking about all things home, all things clutter, all things organization. It's going to be good. And I see you have your beautiful yellow shirt on because you are Alyssa from Alyssa's Yellow House. And I was reading a little bit about how you came up with this whole name. And I love that. In fact, I was spending some time on your website and I just kept feeling such a connection to you because you use a lot of the same terminology that I like to use. And that's creating a peaceful environment at home. And, it's more about the energetics of your space and how your home feels as opposed to rigid structures and, rules of organization and clutter and all of those. And I also love how you talk about clutter in general and how that brings up typically some negative emotions like shame and guilt and all those icky feelings. So we are on the same level talking about this. So I know it's going to be a great, great conversation. So I'm going to let you dig in, but I thought a really good place to start is, let me read sort of your intro. And you call yourself a neurodivergent home organization strategist who helps people with autism and ADHD create functional, restful homes. So I think just to ensure that everybody knows what we're talking about, neurodivergency is a word that we're hearing more and more. But for those who maybe don't know, maybe start with that. What's a good definition of what that means?
That gets a little bit complicated coming up with a definition. So I like to think of neurodivergence as just any way that your brain works that is different than the quote unquote typical ways that we're told to do things. So that is commonly understood to be autism and ADHD, but that is really a big umbrella term that can also include things like OCD. Sometimes people lump things like bipolar disorder into that, which is also a iffy term that I don't love. But really any type of way that your brain works differently, dyslexia, dyscalculia, those kinds of things all fall under the heading of neurodivergence, which is really just ways that your processing diverges from the way that we're taught is normal, which I think is a dumb word because I don't think that normal really exists. But I think there are things that tend to work for a lot of people. And if you have neurodivergent characteristics, a lot of those things just won't work for you. But we're told that that's our problem and that we should fix it. And I generally speak more toward the ADHD and autism because those are the ones that I have personal experience with. So that's where I feel the most comfortable operating. But any type of neurodivergence where you just don't really connect with the ways that the, home organization industry tells us that we should be organizing our homes or that we should be decluttering or we should be doing these other things is going to fall in with my methods and the ways that I do things that are just not quite also the typical way.
Sure. So could you give an example of, I love how you say, the out of the box organization industry, how it doesn't work for you. What's a really good example of like what doesn't work for you that's considered quote unquote normal?
So one of the big things that I talk about all the time, because it's one of my biggest pet peeves with the organization industry, is that in almost every book, every TV show, every like piece of media that's telling us how to organize, one of the big things they say is, oh, just make it a habit. Well, that's great if your brain forms habits. But if you have autism or ADHD, oftentimes your brain just does not form those habits in the same way. So if you look up the definition of a habit, it's something you spontaneously remember to do. I have brushed my teeth twice a day my whole life, but I have a routine. And if that routine gets messed up, I will forget. I do not spontaneously remember to do that because my brain does not form it as a habit. So instead, I form routines where I do the same things in the same order. And so when I kick off that routine, it prompts me to do these other things. So like for example, I have my cat food dishes are in the bathroom. Well, my cats are not going to forget that it's mealtime. They are going to remind me that it is time to put food in the bowl. So when they start coming to me and meowing that, hey, it's time for you to feed me, I go in there, I put food in their bowl, and then they're a little bit competitive. So they really want to steal each other's food. So I have to watch them. And while I'm standing there for 2 minutes while they're eating, there's nothing else to do. So I brush my teeth. If I am out of the house or if my partner feeds them, it can knock my routine off and then I can forget to brush my teeth. And then I'm like going to bed and I'm like, wow, why does my mouth feel terrible? I'm like, oh yeah, it's because I have to get back up and go brush my teeth because that routine didn't prompt me. So I forgot.
I'm curious because I think that, a lot of people, and I've had this conversation with many, and I'll say specifically women, but I also notice ADHD tendencies in myself. Certainly not diagnosed with anything. And I hear that commonly spoken amongst other people like, oh yeah, I've OCD undiagnosed or ADHD undiagnosed, right? But I think that these sorts of strategies can really speak to a larger mass of people as well, because look at how many people struggle with clutter or keeping their homes orderly and tidy. And let's just be clear on, again, like you said, what's normal, right? Pinterest, Instagram, that is not normal. Okay. And so we're inundated with that sort of media flashing in our face. And I think that's where a lot of like the shame around our homes starts to play, right? So I love the concept of routines versus habits. I'm curious if how your methods work with kids, because I could even see, kids of all types really maybe resonating with a routine versus a habit.
So I love this with kids. My background is actually in elementary education. So I've worked with a lot of kids. Figuring out how their brains work is so intriguing because they don't know yet either, right? We're all learning together. So one of the common sort of things that I hear, especially from parents, is like, oh my gosh, they just will not clean their room. There's stuff all over the place. They will not clean it up. I tell them to clean it repeatedly and they just don't seem to know what to do. Or like they say, well, it's clean and I'm looking around and there's stuff all over the place. Well, commonly, especially with ADHD, we need to see our stuff to remember that it exists. And I mean, how many times have you moved or something and you have bought something that you needed only to unpack it a few weeks later and you're like, oh, I totally forgot that I had that. It's so easy to do, and especially for kids. So we all have this experience of having an intuitive organization style, a way that we like to organize our stuff. And if you're a kid and the way you like to organize is that you like to be able to see all your things, you don't necessarily have the ability to buy your own furniture, right? So you're not picking up open shelving, or you're not making sure that your storage bins are clear so that you can see what's in there. And your cabinets don't have clear front doors so you can see what's in your cabinet. And so when someone says, put your stuff away, that can feel really debilitating because, like, you're asking me to change this system that's working for me because it's making you uncomfortable. And really, it's because the environment is not well set up to work with that intuitive system. So I really like working with parents who are having this issue, because talking to them about, try asking your child, what is it that you like about the way that your things are? Or what is it that stresses you out when I come in here and I pick up all your things? And, we all have that experience of like being in middle school, high school, those early teenage years, and parent, grandparent, somebody comes in and cleans your room. And we're like, oh my God, all my stuff is gone. Why did you do this? You've lost all my things. And our little kids feel that way too. And they don't like people moving their stuff around where they don't intuitively understand where it is. So having those systems to understand, like, okay, this is a thing that keeps happening. I keep ending up with a pile of stuff over here. I don't love that, but it does keep happening, which means I'm doing it for a reason. And that reason is not that I'm lazy and bad. The reason is something else. The reason is that it seems more convenient to put it here, or it makes more sense for my brain to put it here than it does to put it away where it goes. So maybe it shouldn't go there. Maybe it should go somewhere that seems easier and more intuitive. And when we can let our kids sort of grow into their natural organizational style, we can avoid a lot of them feeling shame and guilt and all that stuff, because they don't ever have a problem with organization. They just know how to set things up so that it works for their brain. And I love how you're talking about, like, a lot of people right now are saying like, oh yeah, I probably have this, but undiagnosed. I am not a stickler for diagnosis because, for one, it's expensive and hard to get as an adult, especially. But for two, as a diagnosed person, when I got my diagnosis, having a letter from my doctor did not change my brain. I did not suddenly start operating differently just because I had a piece of paper with some words on it. So any tool that helps you is a good tool. Whether you have a formal diagnosis or not, if you're finding tools that help you, use them.
Absolutely. I feel like you're speaking right to me because I am going through this with not only my kids, but just moving twice in 6 months. So yeah, it's been a lot. And, I work in this space. I work with clients who maybe have clutter issues. As adults, a lot of the times there's, emotional underpinnings as to the reasons why their space is clutter. It's usually wrapped up in what we're talking about. So I'm familiar with a lot of that, but I haven't really understood the psychology of children and how they work. And so I love what you're saying, because I'm thinking specifically about my daughter. She's 9. My son is 11. He doesn't seem to really care as much about his things. He's very easy at like, yeah, I don't play with that anymore. We could donate it, but my daughter is very much, she loves her things and she cherishes them. And what you were saying about the routines, whenever she gets in the mood to clean or organize her bedroom, she will make a list. And that's what I mean by you were talking right at me, because it would be like, wash my face, brush my teeth, organize my stuffies, fluff my pillow, whatever it is. Like, she would have to make herself a routine checklist. And when she followed that, her room is like spotless. And I don't have to go in there and do anything. And she gets my praise and all of that. I've noticed when I go in her room and it is messy, I am triggered, right? It's my own emotional triggers that are like, okay, because I grew up in an environment where, like maybe there was some unease, like parents could get very easily frustrated and you didn't know when the shoe was going to drop. And maybe there was some walking on eggshells, right? And that's a whole conversation for another podcast. But that is where my sense of organization sort of came into play. Was my room, that was the only environment that I could control. And now as an adult, like, I'm waking up to that and I'm softening that part of myself. And so it's been really confronting having a daughter who is very, I'll just say messy for a lack of better term in this context, but who just isn't so rigid about that like I am.
Yeah, and that's also a lot of where those feelings of guilt and shame can come from, is because your parents are on you to clean your room and how messy you are and how lazy you must be, and nobody else has a problem with this. And then you do it and you spend the several hours that it takes to get it all organized the way they want it, not the way you want it. And then what's their response? Oh, look who cleaned their room. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And so then you just develop these feelings of like, when I'm not organized, it's bad. When I am organized the way I want to be organized, it's wrong. And when I'm organized the way I'm supposed to be organized, it's still wrong. So then we develop this idea that like, I'm just a messy person. And I tell people all the time, messiness is not a character trait. It's a sign that you're operating in systems that don't work for you. Because a lot of times we feel messy and other people feel like we're messy. But sometimes we feel like we know where everything is, and other people are like, oh my goodness, I could not operate with a desk that looked like that. And we're like, oh, really? Because I have this here and this here and this here and this here. And it's not really messy. It's just visible. But we're conditioned to think that visible stuff equals messiness.
Makes so much sense, because even though I can look at her space and see it as messy, I could just as easily see, as you're saying, look at my desk and know where everything is, even though it looks to someone else messy. So that makes so much sense. And I also love how you were saying having the clear containers and storage options, because in her case, yes, she loves to display everything that she's accumulated, right? And I mean, she has a lot of stuff, but she appreciates everything she has. And so I love that you're bringing this awareness, because I think that a lot of parents could really benefit from just finding the right solution, as opposed to forcing some strategy on a child that is just going to make them feel crappy in the end.
Right, because we don't want our kids, we know how we felt growing up with that, and we don't want kids to feel that way. We know that it feels bad and we don't want them to, but we also often just don't know a better way. Because we were told there is one correct way to be organized. It's with all your stuff put away where nobody can see it, where you have clean surfaces. And that's just not necessarily the only way. And it's not necessarily the way our kids want to display their things or to organize their things. And allowing them to have that autonomy is part of allowing ourselves to have that autonomy to decide, actually, you know what? I don't want a cabinet. I want open shelving. That's what works for me. So let's do that. And being able to, like you're saying, be okay with not everything being the way that we would do it can be really hard, and it can be a really emotionally difficult experience, but it can also be really rewarding.
So I want to segue a little bit away from kids, and I want to maybe talk about your approach with, so I find with clients, obviously, like storage is always like top of mind for everybody. Either there's, not enough of it, or you have too much stuff, or countertops are messy because storage is lacking. It was one of your blogs that you wrote about where to store things. in ways that they make sense and not what you think, where you think they should go. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because I think that was really a unique approach to where you store your items.
I love this. I love this conversation because a lot of times, if you get into some really sort of niche online spaces with a lot of people who have autism and ADHD, which also, brief segue here. I, as an adult diagnosed person, will sometimes say people with autism, and sometimes I will say autistic people. I personally am equally comfortable with both. I didn't grow up knowing that I was autistic, so I'm also comfortable with person with autism. But I am also an autistic person. It does impact everything that I do and the way that I think and the way that I live my life. So, brief segue on that. I
Thank
will
you.
use both interchangeably. I know that not everyone feels that way. It can be a very sticky topic. But talking about where do you store your stuff and how do you figure out, a big thing is just how do you figure out what needs to be stored somewhere else? So when you get into these very niche online spaces with a lot of autistic and ADHD people, they will talk about a thing called doom piles, which stands for didn't organize, only moved. And that's those piles of stuff that build up on the corner of the countertop, and you're like, oh, this is terrible. So you pick it up and you dump it in the chair. Well, then someone needs to sit in the chair. So you pick it up and you dump it on the couch. And we just move these piles of things around our home instead of actually figuring out, why do these things end up in the pile? Eventually, you get frustrated, you pick it all up, you put it away. Next week, pile is back. These are things that, instead of looking at this pile and thinking, why am I so lazy that I could not put this away where it goes? I look at this and think, each one of the items in this pile, for some reason, the place where it goes, the barrier to putting it there is too high. And that's why I'm not doing it, because I would rather have this space cleared off. So if it's not cleared off, it's because there is something about putting this thing in the designated location that just feels too hard. Maybe it's hard to get to. Maybe it's all the way across the house. Maybe it's behind something else that I don't use as often. Maybe I'm going to use this thing again in 15 minutes. And so having to put it away just feels more difficult than the reward I'm going to get. So in that case, instead of putting these things away in their currently designated location, I need to just decide a new place to put them. Generally, I like to put things away within about an arm's reach of where I'm going to use them, especially for those things that are just chronically hard to put away. Because those are the things that we use. We think about it for 2 seconds. Yeah, I really should put this away. And then we lay it down and we walk away. When we come back, it's still laying here. And we're like, oh man, I should have put this away. And this feeds into this whole emotional cycle. Where if you can look at that and say, okay, the place where this goes doesn't work for me. Now you're free to choose a new place where that can go that feels better, that feels more authentic to you, that feels natural and intuitive. And then you're going to find yourself actually putting it away instead of just laying it down. And if you choose a new place and you once again find yourself just laying it down, that's not the spot either. Pick a new one. It can evolve, it can change with you, but giving yourself the grace to notice, if I'm putting this down here instead of putting it away in its designated location, the problem is not me. The problem is the designated location.
That's a great reframe. So what's like a good example? We'll use the kitchen for an example, because I think so many people have cluttered kitchen countertops and all of that. That seems to be a headache space for a lot of people. So like, what would be a good example of something not in the most sensible place?
So it's sort of backward because it's getting something out instead of putting something away. I have a tendency to let the dishes build up sky high because I don't like doing dishes. So if there is the tiniest barrier to doing the dishes, I won't do it because it's too hard. My brain will find something else to do. So one of the barriers that I found was keeping my dish soap underneath the counter was enough of a barrier that I was like, oh, well, I can't see the dish soap, so it's not in my awareness. I'm not thinking about it. So instead, I got a really cute little container for my dish soap. And I take my dish soap out of the ugly container that I don't want to look at, put it in the cute little glass container, and set it on the side of the sink so that it's easy to get to. It's in my line of sight. It's in my awareness. It's easier at that point to just wash the dish because it's already all so close and available to me. So despite the fact that the whole time I was growing up, the dish soap was located underneath the sink. That's what I learned was the correct location for the dish soap was underneath the sink. That doesn't work for me. I wasn't using it. So instead, I moved it to where I could use it, and that got better. Also, I have, as a separate example, I love houseplants, and I have several houseplants in my kitchen, and I like to have things, around me where I'm often working with my houseplants. So I've got fresh pots. I've got probably a bag of dirt. I think there's a bag of dirt on the floor in my dining room right now because I was repotting plants yesterday and it was pouring rain. So it hasn't gone back to the garage yet. So I keep those things sort of in the room, but I find a better place to put them so they're not like on the kitchen table. But instead of expecting myself to take them all back to the garage, I know I'm not going to do that. I'm obviously not going to do that. I've never done it before, so I'm probably not going to start today. So rather than assuming that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be a totally different person who's suddenly going to find it super easy to gather all this stuff and take it out to the garage, I just put a basket in my dining room and I keep my pruners, my rooting hormone, my little trowel, some extra pots. I just keep them in that basket in that room so that when I'm done with it, I can load it all back into that basket. It's not in my way. It's not taking up space that I would be using for something else, but I'm also then not living with the unrealistic expectation that I'm going to wake up today and decide, actually, I'm going to take all these things back to the garage because I don't use them in there. I use them on the dining room floor.
Those are great examples. And I couldn't help but think like, back to the kitchen soap example, it's almost like an empowerment move. You know what I mean? Because like you've been told like that's not normal. And so you end up telling yourself that, it's not normal to not want to do the dishes. It's not normal to keep the soap anywhere but under the sink. But when put it where it makes most sense for you, it's like you bring your power back. And then I would only assume that makes you like do the dishes, right?
Yeah.
Because you feel in control. And I think just like with kids, when you're as a parent, you're giving them strategies that don't work for them, they feel powerless. They don't feel control of their space. And so I could even see that, in your example as an adult.
Yeah. It's very empowering. And it's also, I love anytime that I can introduce a moment of whimsy into my life, I'm going to go for it. Anytime I can be the protagonist of my own little movie, I'm going to go for it. And so getting to just use the cute little glass container that I've gotten for my soap every single time, I just have to giggle to myself like, oh, I get to use this really pretty thing. And like, I'm doing the dishes. You wouldn't think that would be a fun experience. I certainly don't look forward to doing the dishes, but I do look forward to getting to use the dish soap.
Love that. I love that reframe. That's brilliant. So you mentioned you were not diagnosed as a child. You're diagnosed as an adult. Was it sort of your home environment? What tipped you off that maybe you have autism?
I had a friend who was doing some college graduate work. And because of some difficulties that this friend was having with their graduate work, one of their professors had recommended that they maybe seek a formal diagnosis so that they could get some supports in their academic institution. And after the evaluation results came back, my friend got a hold of me and said, hey, a bunch of these things we have in common, those are symptoms, and you should probably get evaluated. And I thought, that makes sense. Okay, sure. Because working with children, I always worked very, very easily with neurodivergent children. I worked very easily with kids that other teachers struggled to work with. So as I thought about it, I thought, yeah, okay, I work well with them because we're coming from the same place. I understand what they're saying to me. They understand what I'm saying to them. So I went and started seeking out the process of how do I get a formal diagnosis, or how do I get evaluated for that? And I wasn't totally prepared to say this is something I have, but I definitely thought enough about it to think I need to go get this evaluation. And my results came back and were like, yep, you were correct. That's probably why. And actually, it was a huge blessing for me because I had, at that point, early pandemic, I had recently gotten out of teaching. It was a generally just really difficult time. I mean, when you leave your home for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, you can kind of ignore the state that it's in. When you're suddenly home all the time, you can't. And I couldn't get past it. And I was telling myself all of those things about, oh my gosh, if I just stopped being lazy, I could fix this. If I just focused more, I could, if I just put some effort in, I could make this better. And it wasn't working and it wasn't working. And as soon as I got that formal diagnosis, I thought, okay, if I had a student who had something that they wanted so bad that they could taste it, but they just couldn't quite get there, I would never tell this student the things that I was telling myself. I would be looking at what is in their environment that's not setting them up to succeed. What am I not doing for them that I could be doing that would help them achieve this thing that they want so much? And I flipped it around and started asking myself, why am I doing these things that don't make sense for me? What is it that I'm doing that I could simply do differently? This is my house. I get to make the rules here. I don't have to live with these pre-ingrained messages that are coming at me from anywhere and everywhere. Like, even family members, like they're trying to help. They're not being malicious. They're not trying to force you into things that feel unnatural. It's just that this is what they were taught is the best way. They're trying to set you up for success. Things like HGTV, I do not care. You're telling me this is the best way to do it. Like, okay, maybe if I have $2 million and I'm a butterfly farmer looking for a house on the ocean, but like, that's not my life. So I'm not going to worry about that. And just giving myself permission to not worry about other people's expectations, or in some cases, even my own expectations. Because I could recognize that a lot of those expectations were not realistic and not necessarily healthy. So reframing to, okay, my expectation is that I feel safe and comfortable and restful in my home. What do I need to do to make that happen? And changing a lot of those things that were just persistently causing me frustration. Like, okay, if it's really, really frustrating for me to put the glass baking dish back in the top cabinet because I'm not as tall as my cabinets in my house, I'm just going to put it somewhere else. It can live someplace else. I use it pretty regularly. I'll just swap it with something I don't use as often. And now my food processor lives up there, and my baking dishes live down in the bottom cabinet because I use them all the time. So it doesn't even have to be great, big, sweeping changes. We tend to think if we want a big change, we have to take a big action. And we don't necessarily have to do that. We can take small actions a little bit at a time that add up to feeling really, really good whenever you walk in your home.
Absolutely. And the whole, not being able to reach the upper cabinets, I can totally relate. The rental we were in a few months ago had 42-inch cabinets and 12-foot ceilings, and I'm 5'2". That's not working for me. So everything was on the first shelf. That was it. Like, I do not need a ladder to get things out of my kitchen. Like, that's just madness. And it really is about creating an environment in your home that is intuitively led. That is something I speak about so much on this podcast and through my own practice, is living intuitively with your home. And sometimes, a lot of times, people don't know how to tap into that intuitive parts of themselves because, yeah, intuition, it's a buzzword. It's, everybody's tapping in now, but a lot of us were not raised that way. And so I find that is sort of my step one in working with people is really teaching them how to tap into that intuitive side of themselves, because that's going to show them the best ways to live and work and play and all of those things. So you transitioned out of education and now into Alyssa's Yellow House. So how did the home organization, how did that all sort of come together for you?
Once I really started getting my home put together and started feeling good about it, I mean, I thought I had tried everything and it wasn't working for me. And the more that I found things that were working for me and I shared them with some friends and family that kind of knew that I was working on this, and they, a little bit along started trying the things that I was doing and came back to me and were like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have been doing this years ago because this is fabulous. And the more this happened, the more I thought, okay, this is not information that's out there readily available, because if it was, I would have already found it. And also, all of these other people would have already found it. So it's extremely unlikely that, like, this little pocket of people of just me and my friends here in Missouri are the only people that are having this problem. Like, there's more of us. Gradually, it just became an an avenue for wider sharing of the same concepts that I was using in my home that were working for me when nothing else had.
And even though, your audience is ADHD, those with autism, I think this speaks to so many. I think you've already helped me just in parenting, right? Like just clear bins, duh. Like that seems so obvious when I hear you say it, right? But sometimes it just takes that other perspective to come into the space. And I do that too. Like with my clients, it's, but when it's yourself, yeah, it's hard to see what's really going on here. So I think you speak to a very broad audience. I think there's a lot of tools and tactics in this that can help a lot of people. So your diagnosis was a blessing, right? Because now look at what you've been able to do with it and the people that you're helping.
It was. I try to be very open and honest about this because I know there are a lot of people who are experiencing an adult diagnosis right now, whether that's because their child has been diagnosed and they've gone, hey, wait, I did all that stuff as a kid and I still do a lot of that stuff and they're pursuing it, or whether, they found it on TikTok and were like, hey, wait, that's me. There are a lot of adults being diagnosed right now. So I try to be really honest about that experience. It was kind of hard. I had a good 15 minutes to a couple of days period of intense grief. I was hoping for just an ADHD diagnosis because they can give you medication for that. I thought, in my still very ableist thinking before I had unpacked a lot of this, I was thinking if it's just ADHD, they can fix me. And when it came back that it was also autism, it was like there's not a lot to be done about that. And of course, at the time, that seemed like just this crushing blow that I was not expecting. And as soon as I moved past that, I realized, okay, but medication doesn't fix ADHD either. Like it provides ways for you to feel more in control. Maybe it makes you more functional in a structured environment like a workplace. But, we wouldn't say that someone who is medicated for anything else is no longer experiencing it. So to sort of reframe that and think, you know what, this is not actually any different than my brain has been my whole life. The difference is that now I have tools that I can access, and now I can start exploring the reasons that things weren't working for me instead of just thinking they didn't work for me because I'm a bad person and I didn't work hard enough. I mean, growing up with that Protestant work ethic, like if you just try harder, you can make it happen. And discovering that, I mean, maybe you can, but also what is the cost? And if the cost of trying harder is greater than the cost of trying something else, then just try something else. And that's what I started doing. So, for anyone who would happen to hear this who might be in the process of diagnosis or thinking about pursuing a diagnosis, I would say whatever feelings you have about that, those are okay and they will change. And even if it turns out that you have a diagnosis, you are not different. You are not any more broken or damaged or any of those things that your brain might try to tell you than you were 2 weeks before you got the diagnosis, than you have ever been. It's just that you're finding out that there are ways to do things differently that you can take advantage of, and you can feel more authentic and you can be so much happier when you're trying to be the person that you are instead of trying to make yourself be someone that you're not.
It's it's poetic. I mean, it's beautiful. And I commend you for putting yourself out there and helping people, come to terms with a diagnosis or an, suspected diagnosis if they don't choose to go through with it. You're a voice for many people out there. And I think that it's very beautiful. I know you offer a couple different levels of support for people who are interested in taking their power back with their homes. Tell us a little bit about what you offer.
Yes. So, my absolute favorite thing to do is I have just fairly recently started actually working one on one with clients. And the reason that I call myself a home organization strategist is because, for one thing, everything I do is online. I don't actually go into people's homes and do organizing. I decided on that for many reasons. One of them was because I talked to several people who had ended up with the wrong home organizer and said they came in, they organized, it was beautiful. 2 months later, you can't tell they were ever here. So I decided, okay, I'm going to work just on the strategy piece. Let's figure out what is not working, why is it not working, and what can we do that would work. So I absolutely love working one-on-one with clients, which is also great because I'm not limited to just people who are local to me. I also, for a lot of people who are autistic or ADHD, don't love working with people, and I totally get that. So I also have the option of a workbook or a course, depending on the level of support that you want. Both of those focus specifically in the kitchen. And the concepts you can carry throughout your home. But I chose the kitchen because it's an area that a lot of people have struggles with. And it's also an area that we use a lot. So it's really hard to just close the door on it and walk away because you're going to be back in there a few hours later because it's going to be mealtime again. So working through these same concepts just in the kitchen, but then you can carry them out through the rest of your home in a very intuitive way that really walks you through how to find sort of that intuition, like you were talking about. It's not always easy to tap in to your intuition. And I like to use a lot of like, okay, find the frustration point. That's where the intuition starts because that frustration is telling you this is not it. So the workbook and the course is a little more intensive than the workbook, but they both walk you through here's how you figure out what's not working, and here's how you figure out what to do instead. And then in the one-on-one program, I will work directly with clients to actually like take the Zoom call into the closet and let's look at what's here and talk about it and figure out in real time what to actually do to solve the problem so that you don't have to deal with this again. And so that if you do find yourself having to deal with this again, because let's be realistic, life happens. Sometimes you get the flu and you just don't clean anything up for a week, or your kids get the flu and you don't clean anything up for a week. It doesn't feel overwhelming and you know what to do in that situation. So I absolutely love working with people, chatting with people. Obviously, this is something I'm extremely passionate about, and I love the opportunity to get to share it.
Yes, I can tell you are very enthusiastic about this. And as I already said, it's a gift that you've been given, and you're doing the thing. So I love what you're putting out into the world. I love, the community that you're helping. So I will be sure to put all of your information, your website, your social handles in the show notes so people can find you. But that is it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
Access to Alyssa's offerings are in today's show notes, so be sure to check those out. Also, I wanted to remind you of the summer moving sale on my website, jadescottdesign.com. Right now, take 40% off your entire purchase and receive free shipping. No code is necessary. Your discount is applied automatically in your cart. I really appreciate your support while Jade Scott Design is in a state of transition and evolution. And so, to honor my favorite step in any process, I am clearing out clutter in the shop. A link to the shop is also provided in the show notes below. Lastly, connect with me on social at Jade Scott Design, and please remember to support this podcast by leaving a positive review on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Until next week, I am sending you so much love and gratitude.